Welcome to the Family Skeptical, Parenting Through Non-Belief.
We're a married atheist couple raising two wonderful, strange children. We ask big questions, dissect weird parenting moments, and examine how society ignores or misrepresents families like ours. If you're any stripe of non-believer who's involved in raising children, welcome. You are our people.
Our kids have heard all our swears, but yours might not have. So be thoughtful if there are young people listening with you.
So, housekeeping at the top, moms, everybody, I am sorry. I was mismanaging my microphone over the last several podcasts, perhaps since the beginning. So this week, hopefully, my audio quality is much better.
It's an exciting discovery.
It is an exciting discovery.
When we were talking about this episode, I wasn't sure what little family update I should give. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking about it. And since we're doing PSAs, or not PSAs, since we're doing updates, I feel like I should say something because I think we end up talking about Go a little bit more than Reader.
Okay.
And I think part of that is that Reader being older, mm-hmm. I am so impressed with him and the things he's doing. Mm-hmm. But because he's older, there's a little bit more of like a big kid complexity to him. And so I think I'm just a little bit more sensitive about sharing those stories.
Okay.
So I just wanted to say that because I didn't want people to get the impression that I'm not focused on those things as well, but I'm just a little bit more cautious about talking about them.
Interesting.
But speaking of Reader, the thing I wanted to mention is I am having a moment because I read with Reader and Go every night, right, for the most part. And it's one of my favorite things that I do with them. And I am just having a moment. So they're interesting kids. For like Reader wanted his name to be Reader, right? He does really enjoy reading. But finding books for him to read himself is perhaps one of the most challenging things I've done as a parent. Like, I have not cracked the code whatsoever of what he wants to read. And I think part of it is that he doesn't really know what he's looking for. Mm. So it is, I get things and I'm like, this is right up this kid's alley. And he takes a look and it's just a full on, nope. Not doing that. So that is like one of my continuing struggles. Go, on the other hand, he's just sort of getting into reading and he has grown so much in the last year with it. It's really astonishing. Up until this point, and I suspect going forward that he is going to be a lot easier on that level because basically if you find something in his interests, he is very willing to give it a try. And his interests happen to align well with a lot of kids' books that are out there right now. So he is a kid who likes dragons and magic, and that just presents a wide variety of options. Reading together and finding books has kind of gone back and forth as far as being an issue and not being an issue. To a large extent, they like a lot of the same things, which is helpful. But every now and then we do sort of get to places where it's hard to get them to choose something, particularly if we're not on a series that we really enjoy. And so with the last choice we made, the other thing we do is we go back and forth. So each kid gets to choose a novel, and then between novels, we do graphic novels. And one of the books that Reader has really enjoyed reading himself is the Amulet series, which is great because it is legitimately a fantastic graphic novel series, like just absurdly wonderful. And so he has wanted to read those as our interim graphic novel, which has been really fun because I would always steal them from him and read them after he got a new one, but I haven't done that in a while, so I'm way behind. And the last one was so good that he was just really eager to get to the next one. So he basically chose a book. He just chose like the shortest thing he could. So get to the next amulet as quickly as possible. And that meant he chose A Wrinkle in Time, which is, there's like a whole subset of books that I've been trying to convince them to let me read, and they just never choose. And so A Wrinkle in Time is one of them. And I was so happy. And I have to say, I don't know if it's that good. Like, I remember loving it as a kid, and I read all the books, and I think I remember having kind of big ideas from them. And I'm reading them again, and there's a certain subset of books from my childhood where it has been really surprising returning to them. And it's not, I mean, there's like a little bit of time has passed, so some stuff feels dated, but it's not that at all. It's like the narrative isn't that strong. It doesn't make sense. And I had the same experience with the Narnia books when I reread them. I expected that to be such a cool experience. And there are things I love in Narnia, but it has been a shocker. And I think in some ways we might be in like an amazing moment with young children's literature, because comparing them to the stuff out now, it just, I don't know, it doesn't quite hold up. Have you had that experience with any of the stuff you've shared with them from your childhood?
Not necessarily. More like seeing them react to films or comic books. Seeing a difference in pacing or art style. Less like a quality of narrative. Because, I mean, some of the stuff I grew up with, reading comic book or graphic novel wise, is still like above their pay grade when it comes to like theme and tone. But, for the most part, I feel satisfied in revisiting the stuff that I enjoyed as a kid. But the books that had the greatest impact on me as a kid are like recognized as seminal classics because they were the like Lord of the Rings and Asimov and Herbert and Pohl and Le Guin and Heinlein and Bradbury, because I was such like a sci-fi nerd, and fantasy, R.A. Salvatore, and his like the Icewind Dale trilogy and all the Drista Word and stuff. Those are still considered to be hallmarks, but not like nostalgic hallmarks. Like, we need to consider them good. It's like people still return to them and are satisfied with the complexity of the narrative and how well drawn the characters are and all that sort of stuff. I have not read the Madeline Engel stuff for many, many years, so I have to take your word for it. You know what I mean? I remember starting that like film adaptation with you a while back and us just like turning it off in disgust. But,
I mean, I think
that's not necessarily indicative of the book being bad.
I mean, I think the film adaptation was undeniably bad, but I do have a little bit more respect because reading the book, I have been thinking like, how would you? This narrative is so weird and plotting, and so much is just done in exposition. I mean, nothing really moves forward in the plot until like 3/4 of the way through.
Weird.
Yeah. And I would say, and the thing I find intriguing is that I haven't, for the most part, had this experience with movies or other things we've shown them. It's really just been books, which is making me sort of, I would say like A Wrinkle in Time and the Narnia series are still considered classics.
Oh yeah. Well, they're considered classics because they're old.
No, I don't know if that's true.
I think they're beloved because of what they're about. But I think if you stack narratives up, I don't know if they hold up. But again, like I'm just talking from what I liked,
yeah,
and knowing more clearly or remembering more clearly what it was I liked about what I read as a kid.
And not that there aren't good things. I still love Puddleglum from Narnia.
Because it could have been like at the time that the Narnia books were made that like there was more leeway given to big ideas and not Narnia, sorry, the Wrinkle in Time. And so because it was such like an out there groundbreaking concept for a book series, especially a children's book series, that it was given that latitude and is beloved for reasons other than having a tight narrative, right? And compelling characters. So it just depends on what you're looking for. And so, yeah, I don't know. Like I would have to go back and read A Wrinkle in Time in order to have a good sense or be able to even engage in the conversation, I think. I don't want to disparage
and to be
something
fair, we're not done
well.
with it yet. So I'll give an update if we get to the end and I feel entirely differently. But
okay. I think what matters more is that we value our kids' media consumption and that we don't just want them to have stories. We want them to see all sorts of different kinds of stories. But in the end, we prioritize stories being well told. And so I think that's where we might be rubbing up against this situation.
Mm-hmm. Well, I also worry I'm losing cred because I still want to read some of those other books I've been pushing them to read.
Whatever. You know what? No, screw that. Like they're gonna read what ultimately like they want to read, and eventually they will circle back to that stuff. But yeah, I am like, there are certain things that I can't wait to discuss with them.
So speaking of classic literature, should we move on to our next topic?
Yeah. I feel like Roy
you
Kent.
sigh, but you suggested it. So we were talking about...
I stand by the suggestion. I think it's a great suggestion.
I agree. So we were talking about things to discuss, and you brought up a topic that really made me think. So do you want to explain what the idea is, or should I?
Yeah. I mean, it's real easy to explain. I posited, why don't we talk about all the good examples of parenting? Not parenting advice, but like actions from parents demonstrating what we would consider to be good parenting in the Bible. Because there's lots of parenting advice, I'd say nearly all of which boils down to raise kids to be believers and you will be considered a good parent.
Yeah, well, I want to come back to that later. About. No, so what we're talking about is actual parents.
Sounds great.
That we look up to in the Bible.
Parents doing parenting stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to do a drum roll?
No.
So, what did we come up with?
I'll trade the drum roll for a belly laugh. For me, and you agreed, though I'd push back and challenge you to really think maybe a little bit more about it and see if I'm right or wrong. But I wasn't able to come up with anything better than, believe it or not, Joseph. As in, not Joseph of Arimathea, but Joseph, father of Jesus, ostensibly. Only because his wife was impregnated by somebody other than him, but he loved her and valued her and her pregnancy enough that he stood by her, traveled far under desperate conditions. They were poor. They didn't have a lot, per the story. They were turned away when she was in labor and had to give birth in a barn. That takes a lot of guts, and it takes a sense of justice about what it means to be a parent. and courage and, discipline. And there's like setting aside his ego. These are all things that we would value, that we've talked about as being values of good parents, that we aspire to, that we don't always meet, but we aspire to, right? Like we've talked about this. Yeah. And so I look at him and I'm like, okay, yeah, setting aside all the magical stuff, those actions are what I would consider be actions a good parent would undertake, right? Mm-hmm. Now there are elements of other stories that have potential to be good actions that end up being like, yeah, not so much. Mm-hmm. Geez, like off the top of my head, like Rebecca, who, like a couple of women in the Bible, gets a miracle pregnancy, lots of miracle pregnancies. Mm-hmm. And she was like, really forthright and very strong woman. And though, you could see, oh, she's like this modern woman. She tries to take her destiny in her own hands. And she, went outside of God's help to secure the kingdom for her other son, Jacob, even after, like her son Esau. Like it's like a Game of Thrones thing.
Yeah. But it's one of the stories that made me stop reading the Old Testament.
Yeah.
I was going to read it all the way
I'm
through.
like, oh, Rebecca's cool. Yeah, cool. And then all of a sudden she becomes like Cersei Lannister. I was like, oh, Jesus Christ. Literally. Mm-hmm. Jochebed, who was, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, who is the mother of Moses. I mean, assuming Moses was an actual person. Mm-hmm. And most historians say, nah, he is not. That, she gave up custody of her son to the river in the desperate hopes that he would find a better home and not get slaughtered. And of course he did. Mm-hmm. Because of course he did. And that's why she's lionized, because she does this selfless act as a parent. So I guess that's another example, though that's one act, I would mm-hmm. say, as opposed to Joseph's, which was like several instances in succession that point to good parenting. But, she did make a critical decision that saved her child's life, and it required a great degree of sacrifice on her part. So that was good. But notice, this is a book lauded for having, an anthology lauded for having all these like magical properties over dozens of books, was like 66 books. And in those 66 books, so many examples of people who have children performing roles as parents. And we are struggling to come up with what we would consider to be good examples of parenting. Now, there is parenting advice that here or there is perhaps positive, but it's more like generic about, making your children strong, or, prizing obedience to parents because the children aren't world wise enough to always know better. Like that sort of stuff. But that's so it's so vague and vanilla as to the point of being like, okay, and yeah, I'm looking for concrete examples, and the Bible is just bereft.
Well, when you brought it up, it was funny because I couldn't think of a single thing. And I still feel like I'm at
not bereft, devoid. Bereft.
Yeah. I still feel like I'm at a little bit of a disadvantage because I know the stories from the Old Testament better than the New Testament.
Yep.
Because I grew up with them more. So there may be, I've read the New Testament once, but there are a lot of different people that Jesus comes in contact with.
Right.
And so I feel like I may be missing something in some of those stories that I don't remember. So I will fully admit that.
Sure.
But yeah, when you brought it up, I couldn't think of a single thing. And when you brought up Joseph, I thought that was a good example. And I think it's also funny that he is probably the character that is most derided.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when people look at it in kind of a non-pious way, it's like, oh, here's this dope, you know, his wife got pregnant by somebody and he
got cuckolded by God.
That it was by God. And I mean, like, I get that, you know, but there's something, I did have to think about the fact that is kind of how we approach the character that in some ways is the most compassionate towards his family.
I don't ascribe, and I said cuckolded like a moment ago, not because that's what my position is, but that's what how other people might characterize it in a derisive way. Like I said, I stand by that depiction as being an example in part of what I would consider to be good parenting. Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't hold that against him, because what if God has these qualities that are claimed, then what is Joseph going to do in protest? Mm-hmm. Like there's nothing he can do, right? So I'm not going to hold him to account. If anything, I'm going to hold God to account. Like, putting on my angry atheist hat here, I would hold God to account for treating the family that way. Mm-hmm. Like, and you know, getting to the motherhood thing, where like I would push back on the consent issue. I would push back on I think I would just push back on the consent issue mostly, just because it always feels icky, mm-hmm. and that it gets a pass. Yeah. And I'm not entirely, and just like hearing people defend it, like right-leaning people defend it, sounds so particularly gross, because they would then turn around and claim that they would be okay with their child being impregnated thusly, which is, I don't know, just kind of a weird flex.
And I would say, though the direct parenting advice is a little lackluster, I think some of the more general advice can be applied to parenting.
Yeah. There's a lot of general advice in the Bible that's not necessarily negative. Like when you get into like the proverb psalm type of stuff, you can strip it away from its theological context, and you're not required to suspend so much disbelief to get to the nugget of truth, right? Like it's I can read, Buddhist texts and not believe in Dharma.
Yeah.
And derive meaning, like actionable meaning, from those texts.
Yeah. I mean, I know there's somebody in my life who was very moved by the fact that Jesus fell multiple times on the way to the crucifixion, carrying his cross. And that whole concept of like falling and being forgiven and getting a second chance. And I think that applies a lot to parenting, which is really an exercise in, messing up, learning, doing better the next day. So even though I don't take any of that literally, that idea of, even the Son of God fell.
I think it would have been much more interesting if Jesus himself was married with a child when he was crucified. I think that would have been much more interesting, because then it's not just like, that then the decisions he makes aren't just him, in his supposed godhood / delusions.
Are there any extant? I can't remember. Are there any extant books of the Bible with Jesus having a wife?
I thought that there, like, because there is a bunch of books, as you know, that were not included for. Yeah,
I read one of them in a class, which is like the infant gospel of Jesus, which is about Jesus's childhood.
I like the Book of Enoch. There's some weird stuff in some of these books that were not included.
Jesus kills a kid. He pushes him off a roof and then is like, as a kid, whoa, shit. And then he brings him back to life, which I think is one of the funniest things I've ever read because it is so perfectly childlike.
Right. Well, in the Gnostic Gospels, Mary Magdalene is Jesus's wife, but her status and her character are downplayed.
Got it.
In the New Testament, in the Gospels that were included.
She's a woman.
Of course. Well, no, but I mean, they just wanted it to be Jesus is married to the church.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like they wanted his most important relationship, all caps, to be something that was not of the flesh. But I think it would be more like if you're going to have Jesus be that conflict, that tumult between God and man, and the divine winning out, I think that, especially given everything that happens in the Old Testament, that him having a child that he then turns his back on because he loves God so much and trusts in God and knows that he needs to die, that self-sacrifice becomes so much more potent, because that is something that we all can connect to. That then we're left wondering, what is it about this guy? What did he know that I don't know that led him to do this? Was it really a delusion? Because if it as it is, it's just this guy and his thoughts and his opinion he has that he's magical and that he is like the great I am. You know what I mean? And I don't know, it feels from the outside very ego driven. Whereas if he was a parent, I as a parent would more easily connect to that, because that is a shared experience I would have with him. I don't have delusions that I talk to /am God.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not being persecuted by the state because I'm a dissident. I don't share those experiences. I think that it's a missed opportunity. But, the Bible is the inspired word of God, so who are we to question it?
Well, hopefully somebody. We can move on to the next topic.
Sure.
So this came up. I was thinking about a couple different things, but I have been reading a book that a brilliant woman I know wrote. Her name is, I'm going to spell her last name, because even though I've known her for years, I am now having doubts that I've ever pronounced her last name correctly. But her name is Dina, and then Gachman, and the book is So Sorry for Your Loss. And it was inspired because her mother died of cancer. And then a couple years later, her sister, who had struggled with alcoholism for years, died. And it's a reflection on that experience and everything she and her family went through. And it's also, Dina has really become a great writer. She's been building this writing career for years and years and years, and it's a beautifully done book. But one of the chapters is about her dad, because after her mom died, he started dating again. And she and her sisters really helped him through the online dating process. And it's a book that goes back and forth between the personal and kind of research about grief and loss. So she also talks a lot about how people who remarry, or at least sort of carry on that part of their lives, live longer and all of that.
Right.
And I was thinking about that. And then I was thinking about heaven. And I was thinking about this because during the period of time where I was really struggling with religion, the biggest part of that was my fear of hell.
Right.
And I don't think I ever found heaven. And maybe this is why that didn't turn me into a Christian. Mm-hmm. I never found heaven a comfort. And I have to say, thinking about heaven, I've never really found it a comfort. And this book made me think about it because, one, I think I was reading quotes before recording. The Bible does not describe heaven very much.
Well, it says every knee shall bow and will join the chorus of angels. And basically, we're going to be exalting God for eternity.
Yeah, but that doesn't tell you very much what it's going to be like.
No. And so what I think it comes down to is you have a lot of people who fear death and want to see their loved ones again. And they want people they disagree with to be punished. And so they sort of magic into existence these solutions, right? And so, you know, I understand the fear of punishment, but I'm with you, dude. You know, the idea of heaven feels, because if apologists will absolutely to their dying breath defend the idea that there is free will in heaven. And then if you point out that that's a logical contradiction to what the Bible says, then, and to God's nature, then they'll say, oh, but it doesn't matter because you're in heaven. Like one way or the other. They don't ultimately care if there's free will in heaven or not. They don't care if they are selves anymore. Like essentially heaven a life in heaven is essentially that of a robot. You're like, you have a spirit, but everything that was you doesn't matter because you're now a robot doing a thing specifically forever. Like if you're going by the Bible, you're not necessarily going to have tea time with grandma for eternity, right? You're not going to be playing with your dog in a meadow for eternity. You're going to be worshiping.
And even if you were, I have so many issues. So I definitely understand that if you think God is perfect, you just sort of believe that whatever he has worked out up there is going to be great. But the issue I have is that God is perfect. And if God is perfect, we always hear, because, you know, all these bad things happen on earth, right?
Right.
And you just hear like, well, but it's God's plan that you can't see.
Oh, yes.
Right?
He works in mysterious ways. We're counting all the hits and skipping all the misses.
So I'm not convinced, like, that could continue on to the afterlife, right? Like, if I have a bad experience of what he's doing here, there's no reason that I think I should have assumed that I wouldn't have the same kind of tension with whatever's going on in the afterlife. I'm not convinced that whatever he sees as perfect is going to feel perfect, because it certainly doesn't feel perfect here. So I admit that I am kind of coming at it with that perspective. But there are just so many things. Like, you know, if I was to die, I would certainly want you to find love again. You know what I mean?
Aww.
Like, I hope you know that, I mean, I'll be dead. I'll be gone. It won't matter. But if somehow my consciousness lived on, like, I would be more than happy if you found another partner that you wanted to spend your life with. But if I was actually conscious in heaven and watching what went on and knew that you were coming to heaven at some point, like suddenly all of that like obvious goodness in the real world would have this like weird tinge. Because then what are we like? How does that all work in the afterlife? Like, are you with both wives? Are you with your first life? Like, all of this seems very complex and strange. And even thinking of the kids, I am not so scared of death as a concept anymore. But, you know, like if I knew that my death was pending, like certainly the saddest thing would be not getting to see the kids grow up, because I'm just so curious about who they'll become.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's something else to think about, that in Revelation, it talks about there's no crying in heaven. Like there's no crying in baseball. Like talking about if you're up there, let's say it exists, and you're looking down at people who you love, like you're not essentially permitted to have a rich emotional experience about it.
Yeah.
Like, and then, but you're still nonetheless Like you have will, but like it doesn't matter at that point because you're not free to feel how you would want to feel. You can't lament when people you love are undergoing hardship. Now, it might be that's because you could say that you now know how heaven is, and you know that that person's hardship, if it's dire or terminal or whatever, that, oh, it just means they're going to get to heaven sooner. But that is such a broken worldview, because like the idea of, oh, heaven's better, so who cares what happens on earth? Why not just kill yourself at that point? Like if you believe it doesn't, it's broken. It's broken. And Revelation is like a fever dream, like mushroom hallucination.
The only like really descriptive things are in Revelation. And I'm sorry that I do not accept that book.
It's real interesting though.
That book
like
is...
there are a lot of things with a lot of eyes and horns and like, yeah.
That book is real interesting, but you cannot convince me that book, like if there is an author to the Bible, you cannot convince me that that is the same author. That book is wild. It's like, anyways. But
now, also in Jeremiah, I hear a side note talking about biblical inerrancy and non-contradiction. Jeremiah 23 contains, "Can a man hide himself in secret places so that I cannot see him, declareth the Lord?" And we might remember that Adam was able to hide from God in the Garden of Eden.
Oh, yeah.
So just saying. Anyway,
just saying. But the other thing with what you were just saying, a person in my life who was very influential, one of the things she said to me, which stayed with me for such a long time when I was kind of heading out, I think to college and like just past college, is she would often, and I'm not going to quote it right, but she would be like, you just like, you need to hit the pavement a couple of times. Like you need to get scraped up and experience life. And so much of who I am and what I've learned has come from living. And I don't find, like when people die young and they're like, oh, they just get to heaven. I'm like, yeah, but who are they going to become? Mm-hmm. Like, who do you get to become if you haven't had any of those tensions or trials? I don't find that comforting either. I find no part of it comforting.
I mean, it really is the reflection of what we usually talk about with the problem of evil, which is the utility of hell. Like, what is the utility of hell? It's basically a trash can. Like, you go there for a reason, for a finite crime. It's always a finite crime because we ourselves are not infinite beings. So it's a finite crime against an infinite being. The concept of which being itself just patently absurd, mm-hmm. that an omni being that has all these compassionate qualities could get so hurt by anything that we could ever do that it would basically say, yep, sucks to be you, into the trash can, just pushes off the desk. That heaven, in a sense, is the same way. It's like you go there and you essentially cease to grow. Like, just like in hell, you cease to have the capacity to learn and modify your behavior for the better. Which, like any system of punishment, if we're going to treat God like the ultimate parent, like he's purported to be, like the Father, Abba, no parent who is good, who I've ever met, would punish their child and not use the punishment as an opportunity for growth. That's the whole point. That's one of the hallmarks of good parenting, is that you don't punish your kid unless it's for a really good reason and in a way that allows the child to actually gain wisdom from the experience, right? Like, we've talked about that too. Hell flies in the face of that. We've talked about that plenty. Not going to do it here. But heaven does the same exact thing. like you just said. Like we get there, and whatever we were when we got there, that's who we are forever, because we don't have the ability to gain new experiences, because we're going to be perpetually limited in what we are able to do, what we can do, what God allows us to do. And so do I want to live forever in a state that in which I die? Well, I mean, like, dice roll, hope I end on a good note, but if I don't, that itself is torture. Do you think, like Pat Robertson, sorry, not sorry, that guy was a turd. And if he's in heaven, turd-like, for eternity, what good does that do the universe? How does that bear heaven out as being a positive place? Because he was such a good believer. He goes, God forgives him, but he still has these nasty, toxic beliefs about so many other people in heaven. And he's not going to feel bad about it ever. He's never going to have the chance to learn how to be better. He just goes 'cause reasons.
And there's another edge to this where, and I have heard so many people who otherwise agree with me on a lot of things, who really have an issue with the sense of finality in our lives and are not at the peace with the idea that death is simply an end. And so I have to respect that as an experience. But I think, to me, I find much more peace in the idea that we make way for the new than in any of these concepts, you know? And
what does that mean?
Well, I think we do the best we can, but I think it's very clear that things have to die to clear space for what's coming next.
Got it. Yes.
And that to me is a very peaceful thought. And I think kind of psychologically for the next generation, like, I don't know if it's a helpful thought that everybody who came before is sort of looking down on you.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, to me, to me, there is a greater sense of peace in the thought of whatever has come before at some point is going to step away for whatever is next. And hopefully that's better. And there's a lot of, I think, motivation and like leaving things as best you can to make whatever comes next better than what you had. But that to me, that doesn't have all of the inherent sort of ickiness and confusion and weirdness of any concept that I can come up with of an afterlife.
Well, that's one of the positive things of cosmic nihilism, which is what we're kind of like dancing around and talking about this right now. And you know, nihilism, capital N, gets this bad rap mostly from religious folks who feel like meaning has been prescribed by something that is spaceless, timeless, and material, to quote William Lane Craig. And that without which we are nothing, have nothing, can be nothing. And so the idea of nihilism, of not believing in anything or thinking that there is not a thing out there that believes that we have value, is very scary. But like cosmic nihilism, as it's termed, I believe, is the sense that the universe doesn't care about us. And that's something that was championed by Carl Sagan. I think most of the time people think about it, they think about it in the language that he termed. And it is scary. Yeah. It's scary to think about how insignificant we are. But with that comes a huge potential for humility and compassion, right? And courage. There is nothing inherently wrong with cosmic nihilism. In fact, I would say, since we've never been able to demonstrate that there's anything other than this universe, and then after which our atoms gradually like separate from their bonds with each other and return to the universe in some form. That is the truth of the situation. That can be comforting. Like we are
I don't actually find anything scary about that whatsoever.
No, it's like we are the universe looking at itself. That is so poetically awesome that I can't, I every time I think about it, it gives me the chills. It makes my heart flutter. That sense of awe at we are the universe looking at itself. It's mind-boggling of an implication in that. And so thinking that the universe doesn't itself care about us, and that whatever we need to do to get right with that is on us.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is a degree of humility. I'm not going to say that theists are not humble or can't be humble, but that is a type of humility that a lot of people have a hard time with because they are very attached to the memories of the people they love. And setting aside any fear of death, because you can have people who are theists who are extraordinarily brave, braver than I ever will be. But if they're attached to the idea of us having these incorporeal entities that make us us and persist, that they will then be a part of their descendants' lives moving forward, that they love the beauty in that. That's fine. But if we're going to be the family skeptical, we have to look at it from a skeptical standpoint. And then we have to say, okay, why do you think that's true? And ultimately, it comes down to book says a thing, or we have these emotions about this situation. You could point to all of these near-death experience, tests that are purportedly been done. The whole whatever number of 21 grams that you lose after death. That was debunked a while ago. It doesn't pass the smell test. So if you believe that spirits exist and it makes you a better person on this earth around my children, continue to do so. Believe spirits exist. But from a skeptical standpoint, it's a bit of a stretch. And then what happens in your afterlife? I mean, I would hope that you seek some sort of internal logic because, Christianity's been trying to square the circle with the Bible for a long time. And it doesn't escape its own philosophical traps. I think, at least, in my humble opinion.
I agree.
It is important. And again, all my love to my Christian friends and family, and also my atheist friends and family who believe that spirits exist. Like you yourself thought that your house was haunted. What it comes down to for me is, what do we do with it? My refrain is generally going to be something of utilitarianism.
Yeah.
What do we do?
I do think this is an interesting one because
don't be a Pat Robertson.
This actually, to me, has nothing to do with religion or not religion. Like those people who feel a peace with death and those people who don't, it's totally variable across all categories. So I know what I'm saying is this is not a well-held atheist position. I have spoken with plenty of non-believers who completely disagree with me on this point. So it is merely my current musings.
Sure. And it also highlights how ridiculous apologists sound when they claim that that atheism necessarily entails nihilism. Atheism necessarily entails hard materialism, anti-dualism. No, I know plenty of atheists who are dualists. They believe that spirits exist. They believe in the spirit world. It's just dumb hearing them say that, honestly. And it's tiresome. And if anything, talking to non-believers yields such a diversity of opinions on the subject that I'm sure we're going to circle back to this topic at some point in the future from a slightly different angle, and I can't wait for it.
Yeah. So everybody can tell us how wrong we are. Let us know.
Yeah. Or agree. Or agree for different reasons. I mean, like, we don't need to have an afterlife, but if we do, I really hope it's a place where we can continue to grow as people. There, that's it.
That's the perfect place to stop.
Thank you.
So, as always, we have to thank First Frame Music and Jonathan Zalbin for the music for this program.
And that officially wraps up this episode of The Family Skeptical, where nothing is sacred except for our kids.
Dun dun.
Woohoo.